Good evening, everyone. My name is Bill Torrance. I'm Superintendent of Student Achievement for Program at the HWDSB. We are starting our French Immersion Grade 1 Information Night in about 2 minutes. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to the presentation tonight. Good evening. Welcome to the HWDSB Grade 1 French Immersion Application Process Information Night. My name is Bill Torrance. I'm Superintendent of Student Achievement for Program with responsibilities for French as a second language. With me tonight is Katie Hopkins, a kindergarten to grade 12 learning consultant with the program division with a focus on French as a second language. I'd like to begin our session with the HWDSB land acknowledgement. The Hamilton Wentworth District School Board acknowledges our presence on ancestral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee Confederacy land as determined by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. The intent of this agreement is for all nations sharing in this territory to do so responsibly, respectfully, and sustainably in perpetuity. We respect the long-standing relationships with the local Indigenous communities, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and the Six Nations of the Grand River.
This presentation will provide an overview of French as a second language programming at the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, discussing both core French and the French immersion program. We will outline the benefits of French as a second language programming. The French immersion model at the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board will be discussed, followed by how you can support your child and the French immersion application process. The session will be concluded with a live question and answer period. The vision for French as a second language programming in Ontario, including core French and French immersion, is for students to communicate and interact with a growing confidence in French, one of Canada's official languages, while developing the knowledge, skills, and perspectives they need to participate fully as citizens in Canada and in the world. We sympathize that selecting which French as a second language program is best for your child is a hard decision. This evening, we will spend time discussing French as a second language programs at the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board. At the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, we have two programs that lead to French proficiency. The goal of the core French program is to provide students with fundamental communication skills in French and an understanding of the nature of the language and its culture. Students take French as one subject. It begins in grade 4. And students accumulate 600 hours of French instruction by the end of grade 8. 1 credit is required in grade 9, however, students have the opportunity to take core French all the way until grade 12. The goal of the French immersion program is to develop students' proficiency in French while building a mastery in English. The French immersion program does not replace the student's first language, and students develop proficient communication skills in both French and English throughout the program. You'll note that in the French immersion program, French is the language of instruction across multiple courses. The provincial standard is a minimum of 50% instruction in French by the end of grade 8. However, at the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, we offer more than the minimum. Both core French and French immersion programs lead to language proficiency. Students from both pathways have the opportunity to challenge the DELF exam. The DELF is a certification issued by the French Ministry of National Education in French. All grade 12 core French and French immersion students have the opportunity to challenge the DELF. The benefits of the DELF certification include having a certified language assessment recognized internationally, and it is also a lifelong certification. French immersion educators get to know your child as language learners who are actively listening, speaking, reading, and writing. As previously mentioned, the goal of the French immersion program is to develop students' proficiency in French while building a mastery in English. The program recognizes that each child is unique, and we honor the entry points and developments of all students. There is a long-standing history of the French immersion program at the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board. The first two French immersion classes began in 1975 at Earl Kitchener School. Today, we have over 3,500 students across 18 elementary schools and 2 secondary schools. At the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board, Grade 1 students spend approximately 70 to 85% of their day in French to support the development of French proficiency. This is consistent among all schools. A typical day in the French immersion program looks very similar to a day in an English class, except that most subjects are delivered in French. The French immersion program follows the same curriculum as the English track. However, the difference is that the delivery of instruction is in French. In Grade 1, there are many opportunities to play with words through song, plays, and poems. Subjects such as French, math, and science are consistently delivered in French from grades 1 through 8. Moving from the Grade 1 experience to Grade 12, successful completion of the French immersion program involves earning 10 secondary French immersion credits out of a total of 30 credits required to receive an Ontario secondary school diploma. Students receive a certificate of French immersion upon completion. Of the 10 secondary French immersion credits, 4 credits will be in the subject of French and 6 credits will be students' choice from the options that are offered at the school. Some examples of elective French immersion credits include family studies, technology, science, and law. Educators understand that parents and caregivers play an important role in a child's success in school. Children in the French immersion program benefit from the learning, discussion, and activities that occur at home. These opportunities support the continued development of literacy skills at home. The French immersion program is intended for families that do not speak French. All communication between teacher and parents and caregivers is in English. Supports are also provided for families who do not speak English. French immersion is a program of choice for all students. As you have heard throughout the presentation, the French immersion program aims to develop students' proficiency in French while building a mastery in English. It is a program of choice and is one pathway to develop French proficiency at the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board. Mr. Torrens will now speak about transportation and the application process.
Thank you, Katie. I'll begin my portion of the presentation just speaking to transportation. So transportation for French immersion is offered to elementary students whose in-catchment school exceeds 1.6 kilometers from their home. For our grade 1 to 6 students, typically there's a black and yellow bus with community stops. Now, a community stop is a centrally located stop similar to a transit style stop with the HSR for students and may not be within walking distance of your home. Community stops may change year to year based on the home addresses of the students riding the bus. It's determined over the course of the summer where those community stops will be. However, regardless of the number of community stops or where they are, our transportation policy indicates that from the furthest stop to school on a normal day in normal driving conditions should not be more than 60 minutes. Grade 7 and 8, unless there is a bus route as noted on the slide, takes the Hamilton Street Railway, the HSR. Where it's not available, we will find another transportation requirement to do that. So please note that students who are at an out-of-catchment school are not eligible for transportation through this model. I'd like to provide some background now in terms of the online application process. 5 years ago, our Board of Trustees approved this process as a way to ensure that all families wishing to enroll their children in French immersion could do so. To allow us to manage accommodation pressures, including staffing, again, to make sure that we weren't denying any students the opportunity for French immersion if their family did prefer it. We also wanted to work to balance our enrollment in dual track French immersion and English track schools, which is to say we wanted to have schools where the proportion of one language track to another didn't exceed 60-40 or 70-30. That's something that we continue to work on, but certainly it was the intent of the board for us to do so through this application process. The online application itself is on our HWDSB main website in a subpage. So the hyperlink is www.hwdsb.on.ca/FI. As you scroll down the page from there, and you can see on the screen, screenshot, you'll see French Immersion Registration tab. So if you are interested after tonight's session, and when we do open up the application on November 29th, please follow these directions to that French Immersion registration. If you are one of our students already, please ensure that you have your child's Ontario education number. You can find that on a kindergarten report card. So to speed along the process of registration. When you go to the registration tab, your next step will be to make an online account. That enables you to connect to, if you are an HWDSB parent or guardian already, us in our student information system to speed along the process of registration. It also enables us to add you to a larger mailing list to aid in communication when we have made placement decisions. Although difficult to see on this slide due to its size, on the left is a screenshot of the account creation and the questions that you will be asked to do so. You will receive an email confirmation that your child is registered if you do complete this process. This next slide speaks to the timelines within the process. We'll be opening up the application on Monday, November 29th. It is for senior kindergarten students only. And I'll just underline, this is for grade 1 and for senior kindergarten students only. If you have a child who's younger than that, please wait until they are in their senior kindergarten year, which essentially means that they will be turning age 6 in 2022. We will keep the application process open until Sunday, January 29th at midnight, where we will then close it. The applications will continue to be accepted after the 22nd. However, I need to note that those will be considered then late applications, and guarantees in terms of transportation and placement at your child's home school is not possible. We will communicate out to families program locations that we're offering to all of you on February 25th by 4 p.m. and then provide all of you 2 weeks to make a decision if you accept the placement that we have provided. This next slide speaks to how we decide placement for students. So connecting back to the process approved by our trustees 5 years ago, the criteria for placement includes the availability of our program based on the French immersion boundary of a school. So certainly every school has an English boundary, and then our French immersion schools have a wider boundary that often, with only 2 exceptions at this point, encompass a number of English elementary schools. So throughout our system, we have our French immersion schools with large catchment areas, and then smaller English-only schools that fit within that French immersion boundary. So certainly we use a closed to out of catchment system for French immersion. There is no choice. You would be going to your boundary or catchment French immersion school. We will work to have grade 1 siblings who are entering French immersion, attending the same school as their older sibling, if it is in catchment, if that sibling is in French immersion, space permitting, and providing that the student then remains in French immersion. So what that means is that if there are available spaces in a school, then we enact what might colloquially be known as a sibling rule to ensure that we are keeping families together. There may be the more slight chance that that is more difficult to do, and we may not be able to guarantee that. There is another criteria for placement is the balance of French and English enrollment within the school. And I've spoke a little bit to that previously. And we also look at the year-over-year impact and how big a school is and how it's influencing its capacity. So the number of classrooms within a school will very much be dictated by that factor. So if we can see that having 3 classrooms in grade 1 in a given school over a number of years will require us to place portables on a school, for example, we may not open 3 classrooms. We may open 2 and move the 3rd classroom to another school. Continuing with the placement question, it is really important to note that we may be in a situation in many schools where the number of applicants exceed the number of places. So as mentioned, we will use the sibling rule. We will also then, at that point, put the remaining spaces into a random selection process. We'll do this prior to February 25th, and we will select through that process students who will be offered an in-catchment placement and in their home French immersion school, and those the rest will receive an out-of-catchment placement offer. So we move students to an option to continue French immersion at a school that's not their home school. So our guarantee to you as families, as we will find a place within our system for every student whose parents or guardians want them to attend French immersion. However, we cannot guarantee that that will occur in your home school. So I just want to make that very clear, and I'll repeat myself. We will guarantee that we will find a space for your child somewhere within the system. However, we cannot guarantee that will be your home school. So if it is not your home school and you're offered an out-of-catchment placement, then you must organize your own transportation to attend that school. We keep your child on a wait list for their home French immersion school until a space does open. So while we cannot make a guarantee, our history has shown us that typically families that apply on time, so apply by the deadline in January, the 22nd, they will be able to often go to their home school as the wait lists resolve themselves. Families move, families decide that French immersion is not in the best interest of their child, or for other reasons. So if you are offered an out-of-catchment placement, you will be automatically placed on that waiting list. You can accept that placement to a French immersion school out of catchment, or you can decline it, and which then has you attending your home English school, but you will remain on the wait list. So just to add just a little more detail. So if you do, once again, decline that out of catchment placement, your child remains on the wait list for their home French immersion school until a space opens. We'll likely close that space at the end of September 2022. We've been known to extend that on a case-by-case basis. but typically when we reorganize schools at the end of September or early October, we tend to then limit the number of grade 1 students entering French immersion late. The program moves quite quickly. Students start to acquire oral French quite quickly, and it becomes quite challenging for a student to enter at a late date. So, but we monitor that closely, and again, on a case-by-case basis, we may extend that. If you apply late, a couple of key points there. We extend our guarantee that we will find a place for all of our late applicants as well. We will offer you a placement in your home French immersion school. If there is space, we'll put you on the wait list if there is not. Typically, we will make you aware that transportation is not guaranteed or will not be provided as per the directions from the board. So now we turn to the question of what to do next. I hope this has been an informative presentation, and it helps you to consider what is best for your child. Once again, please do enroll by January 22nd to be on time if you are interested in having your child in French immersion. We're now going to take a break from presenting and speaking for approximately 5 minutes. And during these 5 minutes, we encourage you all to use the chat function within Teams Live to ask questions of us. Katie and myself will come onto the screen and take turns answering questions. We expect some of the questions will be common to a number of parents. So our hope is that we would have addressed all your questions on screen by the time our hour together is up. So we're on a 5-minute break right now to allow you to answer some questions. And once again, I'll just reiterate my thanks to all of you for spending some time with us tonight and being interested in French immersion at the HWDSB. Greetings, everyone. Thank you for spending some time listening to our presentation. I'll start now to answer a few questions related to application, school boundaries, transportation, and then I'll turn things over to Katie to talk a little bit about program related. There is a question around when the application opens. So just as a reminder, that's Monday, November 29th. And this is for students who will be 6 years old in 2022. So therefore would be in grade 1 next year. So grade 1 is our only entry point for French immersion, except for some very limited cases when a family is moving into our school board who already has a strong capacity in French and can move directly into French immersion. There's a question around the stability of our teaching staff involved in French immersion. Is there a high turnover rate? So I don't have a specific data in front of me, so I apologize for that. However, we've worked very hard in the last several years to not only recruit staff, but retain staff who are French qualified. With the popularity of French immersion, certainly there's a high demand for skilled French teachers throughout the province. All school boards are wrestling with retaining qualified French teachers. So one of the reasons we use a central application process is actually to help us predict our need for French immersion teachers in advance of the new school year, and then actually recruit into faculties of education and hire new teachers. We've also worked closely with our local Elementary Teachers Federation organization to have a term limit or a retainment time for teachers who are newly hired into French. There is a question around transportation and is there a maximum distance from a student's home to the community stop? There isn't. So what the only stipulation that we really put into place is that on a normal day, a route should not exceed 60 minutes one way from that community stop to the school. There is not a limit to the distance between your home and the community stop. In some rural areas, in Flamborough, for instance, you will often run into a situation where parents will need to drive to that community stop to drop off their child. There is a question around if we don't register our child in grade 1, can we register at a later grade? That is essentially not possible. Grade 1 is our entry. As I had mentioned before, the only opportunity really is for a family to bring their child into a later entry if they have grade appropriate use of French and they pass a proficiency assessment that we undertake to make sure that the child can move smoothly into the French immersion program. Just going through a question around the capacity of a specific school, but I'll just speak to some of the work we do behind the scenes while the applications come in. What we aim for stability and to have, if applications dictate that, the same number of classrooms available approximately in each school each year. However, that's not always possible, and certainly enrollment ebbs and flows. So I can't speak to a given school situation, but we actually spend quite a bit of time in January and February examining our school capacities, looking in the long term to what's the impact of enrollment and applications. And therefore, we're making a good decision on February 25th when we send out your applications that we have schools that will continue to be just the right size and not having a large number of portables or other accommodation issues that that might make changes to the learning environment. There is a question that around many of the schools do not go to grade 8 and with French immersion, and so kindergarten to grade 8 is our board standard, but historically we have quite a few schools that
end at grade 5 or grade 6, and there's a transition then to a middle school, so to speak, or another school. So simply what happens in that case, so I'll use an example in Dundas. Dundana is a school that runs from kindergarten to grade 5. The students there in both English and French immersion then proceed to Sir William Osler Elementary School. And French immersion starts at Sir William Osler in grade 6. And for the students in the English track, then they blend in with the existing Sir William Osler students. So that happens in a number of schools across the system. So Cootes Paradise, another school that ends at grade 5, Earl Kitchener, another school that ends at grade 5. And those schools then, the students transition to their new in-catchment French immersion school. And I'll take one last one around applications, and I'll turn to Katie and give her a few minutes to talk about program. There is a question around, is there an advantage to applying on the 29th versus the 22nd in terms of getting your homeschool? So the answer simply is no. And we don't use a first come, first served basis. And the reason we don't do that is that we aim to create as level a playing field for families as possible. Some families have greater access to technology. It's an online application. Some families, English is their second or third language and need support at their child's home school to do that application. So to create a one first come, first serve model then doesn't enable families to have that same chance in some cases. What we do is then take all those applications together for a given school. We apply our thinking around siblings, so identifying the families that have siblings, and those siblings will continue to be in the school in the next year in French immersion. We try and place all of those students, and then the remaining students are then into the random selection process that we do before the 25th of February to make those final placement decisions. So I'm going to take a step back right now. Thank you for your time, and I'll turn things over to Katie.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for all the great questions in the chat. I'm going to do my best here to go through. So if there's a pause, be patient, and thank you for all these great questions. So the first question I'm going to address is the data around French proficiency retained as adults after completing the French immersion program. So as we discussed in the presentation, students in both pathways, so core French and French immersion, are able to challenge the DELF exam. So it's an exam that evaluates French proficiency. This is a lifelong certification. So after the French immersion program, students are proficient at a level that they've taken. And this DELF exam is a certification that is known internationally, and this level can be used for the rest of their lives. And of course, looking at the level at which they use in day-to-day will vary, but they do have that certification. The next question, is there a significant difference between the English track and French track about how much time they spend in English? So when students enter the French immersion program in grade 1, they do spend approximately 70 to 85% of their day in French. They do have core English every day, so they are working on their reading skills, writing, and in English for about an hour a day. And there are other subjects that are offered in English as well, depending on the school. So sometimes those subjects may be physical education, it might be music, art, but the bulk of their day in primary is spent in French instruction. And as they move through to grade 8, that eventually by grade 8 is about 50% instruction in French. And then as you may have heard in secondary, it's 10 out of their 30 credits. So there's a question here about how does HWDSB ensure an equitable experience for all students? So as we mentioned, French immersion is a program of choice for all students. There are many supports in the school, like the English track, that supports students, whether it's the classroom teacher, learning resource teacher, educational assistants, English as a second language supports, and reading specialists. So all of these supports within the school community are available to students in both the English track and the French immersion track. I think Bill addressed what's the typical size of a French immersion grade 1 class, so 20 students. There's quite a few questions here about there isn't a French speaker in the household. So the French immersion program is designed for families that do not speak French, so that is not a requirement. There are many supports that are put into place for students at school and when they're looking to build their vocabulary. And also a lot of skills, literacy skills, are transferable from one language to the next. So things like reading at home and those literacy skills that are developed over time, that can still happen in the language that is spoken at home, so the first language. And many of those skills are going to transfer over to the French classroom and their literacy skills in the French language. I'm just scrolling down here. There's a question here about that a typical French immersion program offers about 50% of instruction in French. So what is the percentage of French taught at the HWDSB? So again, it's about 70 to 85% in grade 1, 50% in grade 8, and then 10 of their 30 credits, so a third of their credits in secondary school. Address this one, but I'll tackle this again. What subjects are taught in English? So those consistent subjects taught across all grades in elementary are French, math, science, social studies, and the subjects taught in English will vary between schools, but some examples include physical education, music, the arts, possibly drama as well. Question here about, is the core French program mandatory and available by default, or do you need to enroll for it explicitly? The core French program, yes, it is mandatory for students that are in grades 4 all the way to 9, so there's no enrollment that takes place there. If students are in the core French or in the French immersion program, my apologies, they do not have to, they will not take core French. But in that second pathway that we offer for French proficiency, students would be automatically enrolled in that. Question here, what if your child doesn't like it and wants to stop the French immersion program? So students are able to go into the English track anytime. We do have supports in place to make sure that that student is supported in French, but if that's a decision that comes from the family or the student that no longer is looking to be in the French immersion program, the student would have to go back to their home school. So sometimes the French immersion boundaries, as Bill explained earlier in the presentation, are different than the English catchment. So the child would have to go back to their English catchment school if that was the case. But again, we have many supports in place so that students feel safe, supported, and feel that they can access those supports to continue their pathway in French immersion should they choose to. There's a question here about what sort of information could a classroom teacher provide to inform our decision to sign up for French immersion, or what are the look-fors? So as we mentioned, French immersion is for all students. So any learner is welcome in our French immersion programs. Things that you may want to look at are those early literacy skills. Are students excited, or would they want to speak French? And you can have those conversations at home with them. There wouldn't be any look-fors, or the research suggests that there's no learning profile that's better suited for French immersion. It really is a program of choice that includes all learners. So a few more questions here about not fluent in French. So homework support at home. Again, that those tasks will be supported in class as well, because we do know that parents don't speak French at home, so there's no requirement and there's never a demand on parents to be able to support. Again, mentioning that those literacy skills are transferable, can have those conversations in English or in the first language that is spoken at home, and those conversations will support kind of the development of different skills. I'm just looking at questions. My apologies for the pause. So another question here, if learning to read, write, speak in French, will my child's English abilities suffer? So as we mentioned, there is core English every day in school. Reading specialists do support in some locations with that early reading strategy. And as well, as students progress through the elementary grades, they do have more exposure to English as they go on through those various subjects. So you will see at first that, again, the bulk of the day is in French, but we do see that there's no difference as they move through in terms of their English skills. Can a student stay in their French immersion school if they decide to go in the English stream instead? Answered that previously. So the answer is once the student leaves the French immersion track, they do have to attend their English catchment school. Can a student transfer from a different board's French immersion program into any grade? If the student is in a French immersion program in Ontario, they are able to access French immersion programming outside of that grade 1, depending if they have been in French immersion previously within a school board in Ontario. Next question is there consistent feedback on your child's performance and literacy? Yes, there is ongoing communication between school and home, so teacher and home, through email, through phone calls, and through those different reporting periods. But that communication in the French immersion program would be the same. Communication would be in English, so you wouldn't be required to have that communication in French. Another question just came in here. Are the 10 out of the 30 credits in secondary school predetermined subjects? So there are, out of the 10, 4 subjects are in the subject of French. So they take French in grade 9, 10, 11, and 12. And then the 6 other subjects are student's choice. So depending on the offerings, those subjects may include math, science, technology, family studies. So there's a variety of courses that they can take. There's also e-learning French immersion credits that they can take. There is no IB program. So the IB program is another program of choice, and the French immersion program is offered at Westdale and at Sherwood. So I think I've hit most of the questions I've scanned. I'm not sure, Bill, if there was any you would like to conclude with this evening.
Certainly, I'd be glad to take a couple questions. Thanks, Katie. A few questions around out of catchment. So all French immersion schools are closed out of catchment. So one of the questions spoke to having a younger sibling of your current senior kindergarten student next year being in JK in another school because your home school is an English school. There's no opportunity to bring both children into the French immersion school if you live outside of the English catchment of that school. So an example would be Central is an English only school, English track school, and Earl Kitchener is its French immersion catchment school. So if you live within Central's boundary, your child would, as long as the process works out correctly, would go to Earl Kitchener. If you were then to register your younger child in junior kindergarten for next year, that child would have to continue to be at Central. They wouldn't be allowed to come over to Earl Kitchener because it's close to out of catchment. We appreciate that tends to be a challenge for some parents. However, we need to maintain the size of our French immersion schools, and one of the ways to do that is to have them close for out of catchment, both in elementary and secondary. As Katie did mention, there are cases where students will continue through the rest of the school year in their French immersion school in the English track, but at the very latest by the start of the next school year, if you leave French immersion, you need to return to your home English class. In terms of the sibling rule, there are a few questions around the sibling rule. Once again, preference is given potentially to, and I say potentially because if there's more siblings than spaces in the school, we can't make this guarantee. However, if the older sibling is in French immersion, if the older sibling is in English, we do not take that into account. So again, if I think about, I'll use an example like Lawfield up on the mountain. And if your child's in the English track in grade 4 right now at Lawfield and a younger child's in senior kindergarten and you're applying for French immersion, that doesn't guarantee a place next year in grade 1 French immersion at Lawfield because your older child is in English right now. If your older child was in French, then that certainly increases the chances that you will be at your home school. I think what I do want to assure you, I cannot provide a guarantee, and we guarantee you a place in French immersion, but not necessarily your home school. But this is our 5th year within the process coming ahead. What we have found is for families that apply on time, by the start of the following school year, virtually all, if not all, are at their home schools. There is often a large number of changes occur from the end of February until the start of September. Families reconsidering French immersion as an option. So there was a question around, my child's having some speech and language difficulties. They're welcome in French immersion, but that is a consideration for a family, for instance, may want to prioritize acquiring their English proficiency over adding a second language at this point. Entirely a family's decision. We continue to support all students, but families do make decisions of that nature. Our on-time structure also really encourages families to make the decision now and then spend the rest of the school year deciding if that's the best placement for their child or not. There was one year several years ago where we had a number above 50 students move out of French immersion just at the start of the school year. So I don't want to discourage any families. If you are interested, please apply on time. And if you are placed out of catchment, feel free to decline it. You'll remain on the waiting list for your home school. But if you are keen to have French immersion regardless, then accept that out of catchment placement. If you can manage the transportation demands, that will come with that. And then we will continue to update you on where you are on the wait list for your home school. And once the school year starts and after September 30th, you would likely spend, if we haven't brought you back or been able to bring you back to your home school, you'd likely spend that year at the out of catchment school, and there may be an opportunity then to return at the end of grade 2. Certainly, if you are if you're enjoying the out of catchment placement, there's an opportunity for you to continue. What we can't do through this process is to allow choice at the application level. So when you do create your profile and make your application, you won't be asked what school you prefer to have your child at. We'll actually draw all that information based on your home address. And over the course of the spring and early summer, then you'll also have to provide a proof of residency at some point, just as part of the registration process. We require this for any new registration, especially those of you who may not yet have their child in the HWDSP. But we also do that as we move families throughout the system, because we are moving from, moving students from over 80 schools into our French immersion schools. And last year was the third year in a row where we had over 700 applications for placements. We currently have about 640 students in grade 1 French immersion. There was a question around attrition, and hard to, very much a difficult question to answer with specificity. What I will note is we do see that students often leave French immersion at very natural transition points. So when those schools with grade 5s move to another school, or that schools that end in grade 5 move to a grade 6, we see students leave the program. We also see students leaving between grades 8 and 9 when they decided to stay in their local home community rather than traveling to Sherwood or Westdale for French immersion. So that does happen, but over the last 3 years, just to give you a sense, we've had between 200 and 300, and sometimes between 200 and 300 students challenge for the DELF. So quite a robust number of students continue with the program throughout, and those who leave certainly have a strong basis when they return into core French and back into grade 9. Some often are able to challenge for a credit based on their skills, acquire credit through that process, and move directly to grade 10, for example. Grade 10 French if they still want to continue with core French. So there are many options. I saw there's also some questions around do the kindergarten teachers or other teachers provide any information or look for? So no. So this application process really works through a central process. There isn't anything beyond you indicating as a family of your interests. And I'd suggest, as we do some work in secondary school around de-streaming, the notion of making recommendations to families is something that we are in a process of really reviewing as an organization. And what we want to do is enable families to make decisions based on the best information possible around their aspirations and their interests for their children. We're having much the same conversation from moving from grade 8 to grade 9 as we're having with families tonight, talking about moving from English to French. It's really about what are your interests and aspirations as a family for your child, and if French immersion is part of that or not. I'm going to do a very quick scan. Very quick scan, little technical issue there. And of any other questions. I'll just build on one of Katie's answers. There was a question around class size. So we do, our official cap is 20 in a grade 1 classroom. Classes could be as large as 23. Because we can have 10% of our classrooms as large as 23 students. But I also have to note, because it does come as a surprise to some parents, that French immersion grade 1 classes may be combined classes. In some cases, they are grade 1-2 combined classes with usually fairly even numbers of grade 1s and grade 2s within that classroom, and the teacher is working with both levels of students and both familiarity with French. So that is a possibility. A classroom should not exceed 23. I'll turn things to Katie to see if there's anything else she'd like to add. And I'm just going to add my thanks right now for your time. And I encourage you, if there continue to be any questions, you can send questions to fi@hwdsb.on.ca. That's our email address. And please also take a look at our website. As noted, that's www.hwdsb.on.ca/FI.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for all of the great questions in the chat. I think we've addressed most of the questions. Some different variations of questions have come up. We're very much looking forward to the applications should you choose to enroll for grade 1. Thank you very much for your time. Also in the chat, that email address that Bill just mentioned, the French immersion email address, is posted in the chat for everyone to access if there were any specific questions that we did not get to this evening. So thank you very much for your time, everyone.